All right, guys, welcome back. I'm excited about this module because it really can be the foundation. And what we find is that we all have developed a philosophy about health. And some of us have more of an intentional philosophy that we've really looked at and thought about. Some of us just have a philosophy based on what we've been taught with the marketing and from kind of some watching our parents, but we didn't really realize that we've developed a health philosophy. And this philosophy is really important because it's from this place that this philosophy in which we take actions. So whether we have a belief or not determines if we're going to take that action or not. And so what I hope to do for you the next 10 to 15 minutes is go through a little bit about the philosophy, the mindset that it takes for us to truly get well and to heal. And hopefully your philosophy isn't too far from what we're going to talk about, because it is, if it is, the larger the shift is, the more difficult this process can be for you, because you've got these ideologies, these beliefs that have been adapted from our mothers or fathers or teachers or preachers, the media, that have created these patterns. And these patterns can be difficult to break, and they might not have served you that well. So let's dive in and let's get into these philosophies, and hopefully this will help. So one of the things I want you to notice, please get a notebook and write these things down. And I recommend that you get a notebook that you keep with you all the way through your entire care. And this way, when things happen, when you have these epiphanies, write these things down. I can't tell you how many times at the end of the year I come to the conclusion, I've come to this amazing epiphany, this amazing discovery that's going to change my life. And I go to write it down, and it turns out I wrote it down the year before. So yeah, it's one thing to understand that we only learn about 20% of what we hear, and that's immediately afterwards. And so what we know is it's not what we learn, it's what we remember. And the best way to improve your memory is to do it with repetition. So oftentimes, if I have a good idea or something I want to learn, I'll actually set up an email alert, and it'll send it to me every day. And I'll read that every day. So it helps drive it into my memory. So what sometimes looks like, wow, he remembers things so easily. Actually, it's because I've worked really hard at trying to remember something. So that's an idea for you. But get this notepad, keep a journal, and write down some of the things that you're feeling, some of the things that you're seeing, some of the big aha moments, and some of the things that have gotten you into trouble, because this is what we need you to learn, right? So we need you to remember so that you can actually grow. All right. So in order to heal, this is a big idea. So once again, we'll preface sometimes the things that are important for you to remember by saying a big idea or a secret. And those are the things you might want to write down, unless it's extremely obvious to you. But in order to heal, you need to discover the root cause or causes to your problem. And as you're going to learn from this seminar, there's not usually one thing that's causing your issues. There is one major thing. I like to say, we have this dam, we have all these little holes, and some are bigger than others that we're going to need to plug. But it's usually lots of little things that have contributed to you being unwell. And once we find these causes, it really helps people identify what the problem is and address it. Like we talked about in the new patient webinar. If you haven't already watched it, I'll give you a little background. But please, it's in here somewhere. Go and watch that before your next visit. It's really important that you understand what it is that we're looking for on your testing. And this way you can understand when we go over those things, what they actually mean. But what we talked about in that seminar is that if you have a pebble that is falling into your shoe, and if you don't know that you have this pebble in your shoe, your foot can start to hurt. And I don't care what drugs you take. I don't care what medications. I don't care what supplements. I don't care if you do yoga or if you do green smoothies. Nothing's going to help your foot necessarily heal until you take the pebble out. Well, it's the same thing in our human bodies, is that we need to find what's causing the stress that's causing us to not allow us to heal, because we've been designed as human beings to be self-healing, self-regulating organisms. And I believe that's the next slide, so I don't want to take away too much of my credit. Yeah, this is it. So the body was designed to be a self-healing, self-regulating organism. And the problem is that something can interfere with this function. And as we discussed in the last webinar, those biological stressors can happen. So we talked about inflammation, we talked about autoimmune conditions, we talked about nutritional deficiencies, we talked about these hidden gut infections, leaky gut. So we talked about all these biological problems that are causing the stress, but there's a lot more than that going on in our lives. So I also want you to know that some of you are at a disadvantage to heal, and it's simply not fair. And as you're going to learn, that our genetics do play a role in the conditions that we can develop. For example, if I don't have anybody in my family history that has autoimmune disease, then I don't have the genetics for it. So therefore, I cannot earn an autoimmune disease. And that's just not fair. Research has shown us now too that if our parents are highly stressed when they're pregnant, that stress can actually affect the baby. And that baby then can become more stress sensitive and more stress intolerant because of that chronic stress. We also know that a mother that consumes more uh, sugary foods, their child's pancreas actually can grow and be larger than a normal than somebody else's child that isn't fed that way when they're pregnant. That the pancreas can be less, that can be larger and also produce more insulin. And so this person can actually be born with more insulin resistance or more insulin problems where they're gaining weight easier and faster. So we know that there's certain circumstances that can arise that can allow some people to be at a disadvantage right out of the gate. And this is why sometimes it's really difficult for people to heal because they keep looking at everybody else and they keep going, well, why is everybody else has it so much easier and why is it so much harder for me? Unfortunately, when we start looking at what other people are doing, it automatically it creates a stressful state. And as you're going to learn, stress does not help the body heal. It actually causes more distress and more damage and more harm in the body that then keeps you further from attaining your goals. So as you're going to learn a lot, we'll definitely cover this more later, but it's important for you to understand is that some people, it may be a harder and longer journey than others. If you've had surgeries and multiple surgeries, that can be at a disadvantage. If you're taking multiple medications, that can be at a disadvantage and make it more difficult for you. Research has shown too that, for example, there's something called the ACE score, and this score looks and evaluates. I believe it stands for adolescent childhood experiences. So the more adverse experiences that a child had, the more likely they're actually to have uh, chronic health issues or even show up with autoimmune conditions because of that chronic stress. It can really impact somebody's immune system, allowing them to become more sick and more chronically unwell. So that's the first place we need to understand is that sometimes it's not fair. But from that point, though, it just means that it doesn't mean that you cannot heal. It doesn't mean that you can't improve. It just means it might be a slower process for you. But I can assure you, by applying these principles to your life, you can improve regardless of your diagnosis, regardless of your genetics. You can still improve the quality of your life. Okay, so that's very important to remember. 90% of disease and suffering is going to be caused from emotional stress. So the childhood traumas, the divorce, our jobs, the ever mounting to-do list, the constant go society that we live in, our children, and all these factors are going to play a role in your healing abilities. Physical stress. And then one of the things that we covered during the webinar was the biological stress, but from now on, we're going to refer to that just as physical stress. So we have the emotional stress and we have the physical stress. Now in that physical stress, we do have the segment of the biological stressors. I like to refer to as more of the organs, the hormones, the soft tissues inside of us. And I like to think of it as the structural stress. That's the physical body. So that's sitting for too long. That's lack of flexibility, lack of strength, lack of balance, the things that we can do structurally to make our bodies strong. And then we also then have the environmental stresses, and that's the air that we breathe, the sunlight that we're getting or not getting. It's from the toxic work environment that we're in. It's from the pollutants in the air, which I already think I mentioned. But it's those things that are going on in our environment that are toxic to our bodies. And unfortunately, too, in this society, we've had more exposure to these environmental toxins and chemicals than ever. I mean, the advent of these chemicals, we have over 80-some thousand different chemicals now that are in our daily environment that we can be exposed to. So that's also adding a great deal of stress to our bodies. So let me show you how health really works. So hopefully we're born up here as high as possible, right? We're born up here in good health. Now, through these stressors in life, the physical, emotional, environmental stressors, they start to knock us down. The higher the dose of stress, the higher the frequency of stress, repetition of it, the faster we decline. Okay. And then once we start to have some stressors show up over a long period of time, our bodies break down, and then we start to have fatigue. We have the achiness, the hormonal issues, the illnesses, the infections, the changes in our weight, our sleep troubles, our memory issues, our skin changes, our mood changes, our digestive changes, and we start to have abnormal labs. And then eventually we ignore these symptoms for too long. We start to develop dis-ease. Dis-ease means it's the lack of harmony in the body. And so if you think about how does our body create a disease? Well, state starts from a state of dis-ease. So that's kind of over here, that state of dis-ease. Then the states of disease, then is when we have organ and tissue joint damage, where we can actually see that these organs and tissues aren't working properly. We start to then get labeled with diagnoses like diabetes, high blood pressure, cancer, Alzheimer's, autoimmune conditions. And then eventually over time, we end up here. We're all going to end up here, right? But one of the things I want to point out is our bodies are highly resilient. They're very strong, and there are actually some levels of stress that we're supposed to be exposed to. So thinking that you're going to get rid of all stressors, that's not going to happen. We're going to talk about that more in a second, but it's the culmination of the physical, the emotional, and the environmental stressors that has caused us to have a loss of health. So one thing to know is that symptoms should not be ignored, and it's how our bodies communicate to us that something's not working properly or that we should be avoiding something. Good example is if you burn your hand on the stove, that's painful. Well, it tells you now I need to avoid putting my hand in flames. But unfortunately, we've been given a model that if we have a symptom, then we should cover it up, right? If you have a rock in your shoe and your foot hurts, well, take a medication. Your foot pain will go away, but we're not addressing the cause. And so this happens all the time where we're ignoring symptoms, not really paying attention to them. I also want you to know that symptoms are not always a bad thing. For example, when you put your hand in the fire, it says it's hot. So it was there for a reason to let you know. But let's say you have a temperature and you have a fever. Right now we've been taught that that's a bad thing. But the truth is that why is that fever there in the first place? Why is your body creating a temperature that's higher than normal resting temperature? Well, it's there to burn off the bacteria or to burn the virus out of the body. So it creates a stressful environment for the bacteria, the viruses to live. But we've been taught that we need to lower those temperatures. We've taught it's dangerous. And yes, in some cases it can be. But I can tell you, I remember when my daughter had a temperature of 105, and I know a lot of you right now go, what? She was just under a year old. And what we did is it was quite simple to lower her temperature. Instead of giving her something that was going to lower her temperature, we simply took off her clothes, put a wet towel on her head and on her body, and her temperature dropped almost immediately. So doing simple little things, and we'll provide you some resources that you can start to see how to treat your body when you have symptoms. A runny nose, for example, we've been taught that that's a bad thing. Well, turns out the mucus that's running is actually very high in antimicrobial. So it helps fight the bacteria, the viruses. But then as a society, we're getting rid of that runny nose, and then that can actually prolong some of these issues. And some of the research is coming out saying that turns out when we stop by doing decongestants, it actually allows for more sinus infections to take place in the first place, because that's what our body's supposed to be doing. And for those of you that are already a little bit on the health anxiety of things, you probably tend to get on the internet and start Googling, what's this symptom? What's this symptom? But sometimes it's okay to look at your symptoms with curiosity. So instead of looking at these symptoms with judgment or with severe concerns and taking it to the next step of fear, because that fear in itself is going to perpetuate more stress, which is going to keep you from having the health that you want and that you deserve. So allowing yourself to experience symptoms in some cases is okay. It's okay that you have a headache today. That's all right. It's not a big deal. Now, if that headache gets worse over time and it's progressively getting more and more chronic, then maybe it's something to be concerned about. But in some cases, we need to let symptoms come and let them go. And that's okay, especially for those of you, like I said, that have a little bit more health anxiety. And we'll talk more about that too as you get further into the mindset sections of the courses. But like I said, stress isn't always a bad thing either. So not only is symptoms not always bad, but stress isn't always bad. It turns out that some stress can actually be positive for the body. For example, the stress of going to the gym and exercising. That stress stresses the muscles, and then your body can repair. So when we're exposed to stressors, our bodies initially are going to have a stress response, and then the bodies adapt. It's when the stress becomes too chronic. Like if I go to the gym and I constantly sit here and curl and do curls every day, all day, eventually my muscles will break down. But some stress will actually allow our bodies to damage the tissues, but then it allows the tissues to come back stronger and healthier. Okay. So that's also an important factor to remember is that not all stress is bad. And actually, through our care and through this program, we're going to talk about ways that you can use stress to become stronger. So, not to use it as an enemy, but to use it to get stronger, become more metabolically flexible, which, once again, we'll get to that later. So, typically, what's happening right now is the medical care is really focused on these problems, right? The symptoms and the diseases. And that's what's been happening is that we're treating and managing disease and symptoms. And a lot of times, though, when you go to your doctor, they're going to say, well, don't worry about it. This is just a part of your genetics. It's a part of getting older. It's just how everybody is. They tell you that they just normalize it. Or maybe it's just that you're depressed or anxious. So here, take this medication. And that's just simply just brushing things under the rug, right? It's not really addressing it. And unfortunately, too, and even in my industry, there's what we call green allopathy, where allopathic model of medicines where we're giving you medicines, medications, or prescriptions or surgeries to fix problems. Well, the same thing's happening now with naturopathic medicine or the functional medicine that we're doing is called green allopathy, where we're giving you a supplement or a pill, even though it's natural for every one of your symptoms. And that's simply not going to work either. Now, you can use these things for short term to help people alleviate some of their symptoms, but it's not the reason that they're truly suffering. So we have to look upstream, right? We got to look upstream to find out what's actually causing the problems. So that's why we like to focus on the actual stressors, the physical, the emotional, and the environmental stressors. And as you go through this process in this program, we're going to talk a lot more about all of these things. So please don't fret. We're going to get into all of this. But I want you to understand is that when you reduce or remove the stress from the body, you're going to allow it to function and to heal better, which can then reduce or even reverse disease. And that's the truth. That's how this works. So we're going to take out the bad things from the body, those stressors, and then we're going to put into the body the good things. And so I want you to understand is that a good doctor is going to worry less about your symptoms and your conditions and your diagnoses and more about the stress to those various systems. And so we're going to teach you those three critical stressors and how to eliminate those from your lives. We're also going to teach you how to use stress to become stronger. We're going to also teach you what you need to put into the body. And some of those things that we're going to talk about are eat well, move well, think well, connect well, sleep well, dream well, and function well. So as you can tell, we've got a lot to go into. This was definitely a little bit longer than I was expecting, but I hope it made sense. And I hope you continue these modules and I hope to see you soon.